power perspective. We hate the government and the law and the rules, but respect the cops and the military.
Yeah, the cops and the soldiers rule, but the government sucks.
Yeah.
Which they see is not a contradiction in any way. Like,
no.
That's,
because it's devoid of politics. It's all just surface attitude and cultural signifiers.
Yeah, it's become part of the culture war, it seems like.
Well, and the thing is, the success of Reagan and Clinton was to change what the definition of the government was, which the government is housing for black people. The government is public education even for the poor kids, right? Yeah. And so that's the government, right? Yeah. Now, the cops who beat those people's heads in, I mean, they just are cool. Like, they're not part of the government, right? They're just awesome, you know?
You see how we did that, everybody? We've deftly transitioned from talking about stupid television shows into talking about interior counterinsurgency and imperialism. Welcome back. This is Seattle Sucks. It's a podcast. We're here. We record. We're on the boat. We're on the boat.
Does your boat have a name?
It's called it's Naiad. It's Greek mythological, which I'm always surprised when people know. They're like, no, it's N-I-A-D? N-A-I-A-D.
You sure you want that information out?
And
I know that's full security out here, but
that's true.
It turns out the names of boats are not on any records or anything. They're just something painted on the boat.
There's no official listing.
No, not at all. It has. This has a hull number. It has a registration number. The name is just something you paint on the boat. Now you have to appease Poseidon and a lot of sailing superstition if you want to change the name, but you don't have to go through the power of the state.
Or you just appease the ultimate authority.
Yeah, exactly. The pagan gods. So I'm Greg. Colin is here too.
I'm here.
And we're here with Brian.
Hello.
Who we also know as at Abolish Ice on Twitter. That's how we got to know Brian, because he's a poster. He posts things, and we retweet them.
So I hope that's on my tombstone. He's a poster.
Oh my god!
Posting.
We're not very good posters.
No.
We're trying to do this whole participate in the world thing, but
it's hard.
And we have this podcast, but we try to also post, but man, I suck at posting.
I'm terrible at it.
There are at least the two of us are posting from the Seattle Sucks and that's two people at least. And still we barely crank. And then my personal one, it's like I can't be bothered, But but we're here. We've got Brian Platt, who is a Seattleite. But also has a piece out in Jacobin that we want to talk about that came out a few weeks ago about cops.
Cool or not? Answer yes.
And that's a subject on everybody's mind.
Is whether or not blue lives matter.
Yeah.
We're gonna finally get to the bottom of the question.
Yeah, we're gonna look at some graphs, some charts.
Yeah.
I used all my physics training.
We collected the data,
and we're gonna.
What were you reading earlier, Greg? So everyone's talking about the insect extinction, but we're actually living through apparently a Seattle police extinction event as well.
Yeah.
According to Dory,
so before we
very concerning.
Before we get into your piece,
first they came from the amphibians, and I said nothing. Then they came from the insects. Said nothing.
Jason Rantz quoted this quote on Cairo, and then of course it's on My Northwest, and it's his headline. No, this is his headline: Seattle police on the verge of extinction over contract dispute, cop says. I'm like, let's keep disputing this motherfucking contract. Sure.
Yeah, and
anyway.
That's a popular narrative too, and it really started getting pushed by Safe Seattle, especially. who I don't know. Do I have to explain who Save Seattle is? Just awful people on Facebook.
Yeah,
Never
literally the
engaged
worst
them in
people.
any way.
The
but,
people who are ginning people up to murder homeless people.
Yeah. If we could just put them in the ocean, I'm okay with that.
We just I don't know, use any of the solutions they have for homelessness.
Exactly. I don't know if you guys have noticed. I mean, you're at sea and everything out here, but housing costs have been a bit of an issue. They've been rising and things like that.
I've heard about this.
Have you heard about this? But
I live on a sailboat. We're ensconced in 200 square feet of oiled teak.
I thought you just really like the sea life.
I do.
But like some mythical creature you cannot get on land, actually. So in a bunch of these older neighborhoods in Seattle, not older, but wealthier neighborhoods in Seattle, Wallingford, Ballard, etc., right? All these people have huge amounts of money tied up into their home values and naturally have a hatred for the poor because of it. And
all that money tied up in their home values that has appeared out of nowhere since 2010.
Yeah, thanks
just
to...
that they didn't have, and now they do.
Yeah, thanks to an enormous influx of money from Asia for rough speculation in the city and all sorts of other things that are definitely going to last and are very permanent.
and that those people deserve.
Yes, 100%.
That they have worked hard to live in their house that they bought to live in that is now has doubled in value and now they're millionaires on paper, and they're going, I need to start fucking acting like it and shooting poor people.
And so with the righteousness of every, millionaire, right, they have decided to make war on the poor, right? My favorite Safe Seattle, thread was somebody had left blankets in a park in Ballard had left blankets in a park, and they have a, 100-post meltdown of this, literally one of them just says, this is terrorism. And, ISIS has finally come to Seattle. These blankets are and they're like, should we get guns? And, all this kind of stuff. It's literally insane. Wow. They were like, I'll call the police and tell them somebody has a gun in the park, for the blankets, I guess. The cops are going to come and air hole the blankets. But anyways, all these guys, love the police, and they invite them to their little public events and stuff, and they hang out with them, and they live next to a lot of them because the cops get paid a ton.
Oh, yeah.
And, the police all feed their little pea brains with this notion that, look, it's the Vietnam story. We want to go out here and do our jobs, but the government's tying our hands. Each one of them was like John Rambo. Are they going to let us win this time?
Let us win!
So each cop wants to but it's telling them this constantly. It's become this huge narrative on the right in Seattle, which is very alive and well and controls most of the state politics. But this narrative that the Seattle police are an inherently great institution, and the only reason they aren't rounding the homeless up and putting them in camps is because the powerful city council won't let them do it, right? And it goes back to that sort of narrative we were talking about, what do these people think the government is? They hate the city council and they hate the mayor, but the police are somehow outside of it. They're just a cool organization that hangs out, and if the city government would just get out of their fucking way, they can do their job, and they'll tell all these fantasies of Seattle cops are quitting over this, and it's A, good, and we could use less cops, and B, no, they're not, because they get paid. They're making $130,000 a year with overtime. There's no job in the city. You can be there year one and make $130,000.
What they're doing there, when they say that, and there is on this My Northwest shit and all over, there's a ton of that narrative around that the cops, they're gonna leave. They're talking about leaving.
They've been doing this for years.
There's this great thing, but what they're doing there is idiotically parodying a Capitol flight narrative that they don't understand, but they have heard that is ubiquitous in our culture, right? That does not fucking apply to them because they're not gonna move their cop operation to a fucking third world country and set up a cop factory there.
Seattle PD Inc. is gonna move to Eastern Washington or something.
Right? That's just, but they've heard, they're that is the response to that they've heard with their dumb pea brains that you threaten to leave, because that is a real power that capital has, that industry has, that we've let them have. But dude, you're getting paid very well. You're not going fucking anywhere. Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, like, if the cop's like, "You won't let me kill the homeless, I'm out of here." I mean, like, good.
Please mention that in your exit interview for our records.
Yeah, I'm out of here. I'm the Green River Killer now. But man. That's their popular sort of narrative at this point. So yeah, not shocked that Dory is very concerned about the police.
Dory and Jason, man, they're like they're real worried about all the cops leaving. And I'm like,
we know the real victims.
We need to get a man and a woman cop and try to repopulate. We're running out of time.
We need a Noah's Ark for cops.
That might be. I mean, that just might be too powerful.
The ultimate cop.
Yeah. Dare we?
Yeah.
We spent all this time thinking about if we could. We never thought if we should.
Playing God.
Oh my God. Okay. So, Brian has a piece out in Jacobin. Came out a couple weeks ago. It's called "Cops Are at War Out There." Oh man, and like they dress like it, they act like it. But tell us a little bit about so it's in Jacobin. You can find that jacobinmag.com. It's a totally normal magazine with normal views that all normal people agree with.
Yeah, fully endorsed by Mayor Janie Durkin.
Yes,
too. She's head editor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very mainstream.
We'll put a link to it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But basically, what you talk about here is like this utterly chilling. Really, all you have to do here for a lot of this piece is just quote fucking cops on the internet to just curdle the blood of the reader, and just between just rage, hate, and fear that you have reading this shit these people say is incredible. Let me pick out a good one here.
Well, while you're looking for that, I mean, one thing that really resonated to me was how your story and the way cops kind of think about themselves and their plight, in scare quotes, it completely mimics the modern conservative narrative. It reminded me a lot of when Newt Gingrich got grilled, and I think it was before 2016, about crime is up, and everyone's going, Newt, that is not true. And he's like, no, it is. And I believe it is, so it is. And it's kind of like the same thing where these people have constructed their own bizarre world that doesn't really exist. But they have guns.
And
with impunity.
Well, and they live in a total victim narrative, right? Which is, again, every MAGA uncle and everything. Yeah, this total victim narrative of I've lived the easiest possible life and have a boat dealership and all this kind of stuff, but somehow I'm oppressed, right? And the police are the same way in that they'll tell the story of everybody's out to get us because them unloading an M16 on a 4-year-old made the news, and they'll be like, the news is our enemy. And it's but when you watch the news stories, they're basically a cop completely unloaded on a child. But the child could have
begging, drug dealing 4-year-old.
But the child
with a history of arrest.
Yeah, the next line is always, but he was no angel, and he had a knife, right? And all this kind of stuff. And it's just this fantasy they live in. But the reality is that in a sense, in their mind, they are the victims, and that they have to be slightly uncomfortable for part of the day because they have to be around somebody who doesn't look exactly like them and things like that.
Right.
But at the same time, too, there's this deep inherent culture that is institutionally bred in police that teaches them that they are essentially an army of counterinsurgency, that they exist in enemy territory, and that everybody around them is the enemy, right? And that's not accidental. That actually comes from the post-Vietnam War era and dealing with the civil rights movement. LAPD, of course, like all good things, originated this idea of bringing in counterinsurgency experts from the Marines at the time, but from the military, to train their police officers and how do you deal with a a population that is dangerous, right? Deal with being surrounded by them. And now their language...
And they asked the U.S. Marines, who had so much success...
Yeah. Well, after successfully winning a war in Vietnam, they came back
and beating back the communist hordes and successfully, protecting the loyal hamlets from the scourge of communist infiltration.
And the grand irony of the whole thing is that come the war on terror or whatever in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was the military talking with LA SWAT about fighting in urban environments.
Fuck.
So, it all came full circle, but the counterinsurgency mindset's just fully imprinted on these people's heads. It's how they talk. They use all the military jargon. It's very silly. Like, to read what cops talk in the 50s versus now is like, hilarious.
They even when they do it, when they're dressed up like that, they're wearing their riot gear, they still look like they're cosplaying, because they're still a bunch of just fucking suburban dickheads who don't actually... They've had like a few seminars, but like they just look like a bunch of morons.
Yeah, and certainly, like, some people, like, I know Radley Balco, who writes about this kind of stuff, has been, like, very concerned about there's these programs to bring people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and give them jobs as cops, right? And he's, like, very concerned of, like, maybe these people have, like, PTSD issues, or, like, maybe this isn't the proper training for a police officer. And, I mean, all that is valid, but the vast majority of police officers to this day are people who are too cowardly to, like, join the military because people actually shoot back at you. Right. They join the police because they know the bullets all go one way.
Yeah.
Like, and they're very aware of
that.
Well, it's this weird thing. This idea, this warrior culture that you talk about in the piece is like... there's some weird... there's multiple forces, like, at work here. Because on the one hand, it's this like, right-wing fever dream fantasy of being this warrior that comes from, for a lot of these guys, probably just feelings of powerlessness and impotence and rage and a desire, and on maybe the brighter side of it, a desire to find some place of respect in the community that is accessible to them or whatever. And that feeds into this warrior fantasy that they take out in real live, like live round LARPing on the streets, but on the other hand, it's not a fantasy, because like you say, they are being taught, and like it's coming from the bottom up and the top down, it seems like, then it's feeding into it, because they're being told that they are fighting a counterinsurgency, and I think it goes, and that I like in particular, like the militarization of cops, like, goes back to like you're saying, the last several decades, but I mean, it goes farther than that, because the idea of policing, as we like think about it, doesn't really go back that far. It's just like 150 years, and it goes back to the idea of having, rather than like a sheriff and some deputies who respond when there's been a crime and take care of it, the idea of having armed people on the street all the time, like watching out for a neighborhood, is a counterinsurgency strategy. In the first place, it comes from the British Empire, and that's where the idea of police comes from.
Yeah, the history of police is interesting. I mean, so the traditional like textbook answer is that Robert Peel creates the first like police force in London, and he designs it after and he does this in 1828, and he designs it after the Irish Constabulary, which is literally just the occupational forces in Ireland, right? Yeah. So I mean, not a subtle transition. Yeah. The United States is actually a little different, because the first American police forces, like you could consider a modern police force, is in uniforms, get paid, carry guns, all this kind of stuff, are the slave patrols that get created. They create these city slave patrols, the first one being in Charleston, 50 years prior, in the 1780s, actually. And that is where the like formal American policing comes from, but it's the same thing. It's
people are on the job all the time looking for somebody.
And their job is not just runaway slaves, it's controlling crowds, right? One of their main functions expressly stated for the Charleston Slave Patrol is controlling crowds of black people, right? Which there were like free blacks and stuff like that in Charleston, but if there's two of them on a corner, they better be moving. And that was one of their main functions. They were also given the ability to search people for papers. They were given the ability to enter residences and things like that. I mean, what you would consider to be modern police powers.
Yeah.
And the thing is both in that situation and in the British situation, it was all about controlling your local labor force, right? Mm-hmm. You needed a London police force because you had a huge influx of industrial labor, a lot of it Irish, right? So why not bring in the same thing, right? Yeah. And in the American South, by 1800, every city in the American South had its own police force, right? That was usually called the Watch or whatever. But, they created those first police organizations. And then by the 1830s in the North, they start to have some rebellions of their own, urban rebellions. And, what do you know? Some of those people who had worked for and run these programs in the South go ahead and work their way up to like Baltimore and New York and things like that, start running there. And then the what you would call probably the birth of like really modern policing, the idea of a professionalized, routinized police force comes from the Progressive era. And once again, because we have a series of labor strikes starting in the 1870s going into 1900, and it became very apparent you couldn't count on local police to put down the labor strikes. And you couldn't count on them because they weren't professional, right? It was all political appointments. Mm-hmm. And the first response to that was they built the National Guard. They created the National Guard in 1877 in response to the 1877 railroad strike happened. Railroad strikes all over the country, and rich people collectively lost their shit. And then for completely different reasons, shortly after the National Guard was created, and they started putting armories in every city. I'm sure there's no connection between the two.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, and you can go back and read. I mean, they directly are saying like we're doing this because of these strikes. And by the time you get to the Progressive era, we need a professional police force that when we tell them to go shoot, they'll do it, right? Yeah. And that's the era we've lived in since then.
And if someone is going to do that, if they're going to be those trigger men ready to do that, then they're going to have the training for that and a culture that is going to make them ready to feel like when they're doing that, they're ready for it and they're doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. That they're out there fighting the enemy. I mean, put some great idea, like sounds like a bunch of great ideas came together here, which are like imperial counterinsurgency, slave catchers, and union busters together, and you get your modern cop.
And the one key element that's missing from that story too, which it's just another great idea to throw on top, is the United States. It produces a lot of things, but one of its major industries, one of its major exportations, is weapons. Right, the largest weapons producer in the world. Right. Mm-hmm. And at some point, I mean, granted, they can sell a lot of weapons to the U.S. military, but at some point, like we've outstripped that as far as the productive capacity, right? So the weapons have to go somewhere, right? So we sold them internationally to people. We sold them to that's the reason why, maybe you have like a weird uncle with 15 guns or whatever, right? It's because they need to unload the supply, but the other location was the police. Yeah. Right? Why do the police all have machine gun? Like CLPD has multiple grenade launchers. Why do they have them? Yeah. Because we have them to sell.
Because they're cool? That's the actual answer.
I mean, that's what the police would tell you. That's why they buy them. But the real reason is why we're armed to the gills is because we make guns. Yeah. If we didn't make guns, we wouldn't be armed to the gills, right? But
we wouldn't a lot of things.
Yeah, so the thing is we have all these horrible elements that go into our policing, right? Which are very similar to most other countries, to be honest. Like they're anti-labor, right? Their origin in slave catching, all this kind of stuff. The counterinsurgency model. And then we throw on top of it, we just opened the doors to the world's largest armory and gave it to them, right? Yeah. And that is the real key. That's because you don't get to feel like a soldier if you're not wearing 80 pounds of body armor, carrying a machine gun, and have a tank.
And then throw in now onto that what we've kind of been talking about, which is the right-wing betrayal narrative of the Vietnam War that sort of creates this whole weird dichotomy we've been talking about, this conflict of being pro-cop but anti-government or something.
Sure, yeah.
This weird, like, right-wing mindset is this. It comes from this betrayal narrative, you know,
which I mean,
because America just couldn't fucking handle losing a dumbass war it shouldn't have got into, and like we've been paying for it psychologically ever since.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that too is even the betrayal narrative is like this hilarious sort of inversion of reality, which is the government. The state definitely wanted to win the Vietnam War. Was willing to fill the ocean with bodies, right? Like, I mean, they're killing. They're killing as many people as they could, as fast as they could. I mean, the ultimate, if you want to call it betrayal, came from the soldiers who didn't want to fight it, right? And refused, and by 1970 or whatever, the Defense Department's telling Nixon the Army's basically in full rebellion. Like, we can't keep fighting. The war's over. Like, we have to stop. Yeah. And but Rambo completely turned that around, which came out very specifically not in 1975, but in the 1980s, right? Yeah. But turned the narrative around. The government sold us out. The soldiers did their thing, right?
Well, it popularized like what was an underground current, the whole POWMIA like white power notion, but no, I forget what I was going to say.
It's also sunny in here and cheery.
Yeah, fuck, man.
We actually all collectively have guns in our mouths right now. Yeah.
Well,
making it hard to talk.
We're talking about Vietnam, so we are doing a little deer hunter.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and I mean, those movies are really important. I mean, there's an author, his name is, I think, Jerry Lemke, who writes a lot about that, that they were very consciously pushing for those movies. The Nixon White House is very consciously pushing for those movies to get made and funding even some of them, like Deer Hunter and stuff like that. And that the reason was to flip the narrative, right? Initially they tried to flip the narrative to all the soldiers are on drugs, right? That was going to be their first thing. The reason why the soldiers suck is because they're all on drugs. Yeah. But I think they realized that's probably not going to be the most popular way to go. And so they eventually just changed it to this they were sold out or whatever, kind of narrative, but which didn't really catch on until Reagan.
Well, at first it was... Well, the first they tried the more obvious of were sold out, betrayed by the people at home, okay?
Yeah, like the spitting myth.
The bullshit myth of showing back up and getting spit on by some hippies, which never literally ever happened once in America.
Ironically, the one news story we have of soldiers getting spit on was people from the VFW spitting on anti-war vets. Like these old shits, fucking spitting their dentures out at people.
Oh man.
So.
But then somehow, when in the fog of time, they were able actually to just turn it back. It was very politically useful to just go, oh well, it was these these un-American forces in the government. And we've had that sort of narrative in one way or another that this sort of partisan un-American accusation.
Well, and generally, the way the state tends to work, right, is, the American state goes out and does something horrible, then it just completely changes the narrative around using its cultural power, right, to completely change the narrative around. And in policing, with the militarization of the police, a very similar thing happened, which is in the 80s, they finally started to open up the armory to the police, right? Not officially, the program hadn't, the 1030s or whatever, this program hadn't been created yet, but, they start giving all these cops tanks and shit, right? Yeah. I lived in Lubbock, Texas for a little bit, which is a very small town in West Texas. They had a tank, because of course, right? But yeah, so giving tanks and shit like that. And at one point during the 1980s, when Daryl Gates was kind of running through South LA, right? It got a little embarrassing because they kept running tanks into houses and shit, right? I mean, full on, just they had this tank and they would just ram it right through a house, and then they'd walk in behind and look around to see if they ran anybody over, right?
Yeah.
That sounds like it came from The Simpsons.
No,
it's in the movie Dragnet.
In Dragnet, yes, fuck yes.
That is a real thing. They were doing that, yeah.
I remember seeing that as a kid and going, this is funny, but it makes no sense. It can't be real, and only later understanding, holy shit,
wow,
that's a real thing. And then at the end, they one up it where they've got an
plane,
LAPD F-15 or something. Yeah. But
And they had this like big PR event, and I think it was in '89, where they even had Nancy Reagan show up, and her and Daryl Gates were like eating fruit cups in this like air conditioned like RV, while like SWAT like did a full like explosive entry on this house, and like I mean just tore this place to shreds, and had Nancy do a tour of an infamous South Central crack den, of which they found I think like a small bag of marijuana was all they ended up finding. And Nancy just walks through, and of course I mean she's been like rich for a very long time, and you know famously thought the decor at the White House was like too pedestrian. She walks into this like home of poor people in South Central LA, and she's like, look at how these people live. You know, it's below humanity, right? And like all this kind of stuff. But you know, so I mean they had that, I mean they were very public about a lot of that stuff, but the reaction they got was not the one they wanted, which was a lot of people saw that and were like horrified. They're like, holy shit, dude, like A, the cops have tanks, B, they're driving them into people's houses, like holy fuck, that's crazy. And so what they ultimately end up doing is they then, you know, using cultural power in an event that actually did happen, which was the LA highway shooting, the LA bank robbery and highway shooting. And like the most important movie of the 90s was Heat, right? And like, and that came out, and basically like when you look at policing research, they'll talk about, you know, they justified having the guns after the fact by the highway shooting in LA. But the reality was this. No, the reason why we all think cops need guns is because we all watched Heat in the 90s. And to be fair, Heat rules.
Yeah, that movie's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool as fuck. But like the thing is part of the reason why it's cool as fuck is it's like it's such a GTA like fantasy of like I'm gonna run through LA with like this enormous machine gun just gunning everything down in front of me. But people watch that shit and they think it's real, right? And so of course the cops need a tank. Now granted they already had them, but you know
now they need two.
Exactly, but we're gonna justify it well after the fact. But that cultural power is so strong, you know. So cool.
Right. And it's what your piece is about like this idea that they think that they believe and they talk and then they sell this to the culture about them, about cops being in danger for their lives every day, and that it's like a fucking war out there. And yeah, I mean it is all I think we talk about it a lot as just being, you know, that these cops are these dumb aggro assholes, but really it attracts those guys, but that is the job they've been hired to do, is to feel that way and take it out on a population.
Yeah, and an institution makes sure you feel that way, and it begins in training, right? You go to the academy, and I've actually, you know, I come from a population where I've known plenty of people who become cops, right? You know, and you see them change over time. Like it's it's one of the things that get theorized, but when you watch it happen, it's a very noticeable change. But they go to the academy and they're shown all these videos of like this cop pulled somebody over and went up to give him a ticket, and they shot him with a fucking rocket launcher, and then found their family and killed all of them. Or so, you know, these like made up stories, or like they'll find some like story from like 1985, or like, but no, they don't express to the people in the training, right, that this is an extremely rare thing, and that we had to go like back 20 years just to find one case of it to show you this thing, right? But they explain it to him as like because they'll show them that, and with traffic stops, this is a big thing in teaching them that, and they'll be like, the traffic stop is the most dangerous thing that you'll do. The irony, of course, being that traffic police is like the most dangerous thing that police do, but it's because of car wrecks. Like it has nothing to do with like being shot at traffic stops. It's because the majority of cops who die on the job die in car wrecks, like which is most people who have car
about who's at fault in the accident, or is that kind of rigged?
It's up in the air, but I have a long commute, and I got to tell you, I have some theories.
You know, I mean, you see those guys driving like fucking dickheads. No, I'm not even just talking about chases, which like seems like at least some cities are like trying to crack down on car chases. Like, I mean, LA was known for that for a long time, and now they've just got the ghetto birds overhead every time. Oh god, that is one thing I do not miss about LA is the choppers all constantly.
The helicopter thing came from after Vietnam. I think it's McDonnell Douglas or somebody who built the Huey helicopters. Needed to they didn't want to lower production after the war. They want to keep making them. So they just started selling them to the police. So,
I mean, well.
But
bring down war production after the war is over. I mean, But, I mean, why not just keep cranking them out, assume we're going to start another fucking war?
Yeah, and if you work for those companies, right, the war's always great, right?
Yeah.
But we wish it go on forever. But
maybe that's it, though. Maybe it's more like, maybe the reason that the defense industry felt like they needed to open up a new market in law enforcement is because, unlike the previous 30 years after the end of the Vietnam War, they were looking around and going, holy shit, America may never get into another fucking war again. Because that's how the whole country felt. The Vietnam syndrome, like, you know, like, everyone's turned off this shit. So they probably thought, well, we got to start, like, we got to think outside the fucking box here.
Sure.
And because previously, just keep selling the army weapons that they will stockpile and then drop on some country somewhere.
Well, it makes total sense because after World War I, the weapons industry did a huge nosedive because the government was like, oh, we're not in a war, we don't need to buy guns, and the army doesn't have to be this big, and like all this kind of stuff, right?
Weird.
Yeah, I know, this crazy thought passed that. But after World War II, you know, it looked for a half second like that might be the case, but then comes along the Korean War and then the Cold War.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the weapons manufacturers are like, no, the bonanza can last forever. Like, we can be forever in the good times. And selling to police is a big part of that. And again, for the cops, right, they, you know, so they're being told in training, right, that every interaction you have with a person, they're gonna kill you, right? You know, they have this like hilarious video of this guy like pulling all these knives out of like every part of his jacket, and he has like hundreds of knives, right? Yeah. Like, weapons are everywhere. They show them these videos where like everybody just imagine that everybody has like a million Uzis on them at all times because they probably do.
I can only fit two or three.
I know. A life, you know, aspirations or goals or whatever. But yeah, so they tell them all this stuff. Then they get out, you know, into a department, and they're paired up with, you know, usually an older police officer who's been on the force for a while. And that cop then tells them all the bullshit that he's learned on the force, right? And this is the bad neighborhood, this is the good neighborhood, these guys do this. And of course, you know, nobody who becomes a cop wants to be like, yeah, because it's a very macho job, so nobody's gonna be in like, yeah, this neighborhood's safe as fuck. Dude, like, there ain't nothing happening. I'm just rescuing cats. I'm sleeping on the side of the road. Like, you know, I'm eating my lunch. Right? Like, no, they're always like, dude, the gangs out here is crazy. You know, like, the gang situation out here is nuts. Like, if you talk to a Seattle PD officer, he'll tell you that Seattle is like gang central.
Oh, I do talk to Seattle PD officers.
Yeah, ask what they think about the gang situation in Seattle. Like, I mean, it's hilarious.
It's amazing to talk to them. I interact with them occasionally at work when we're doing like work on the streets, on the road, and so then they'll like off-duty cops. They'll get paid a bunch of money, come out and hang with us, and like direct traffic and stuff. And man, talking to these guys, sometimes you just like. Then you just get him talking for a minute. Like, it doesn't take much to get him to start bragging about the time they fucking, like, crack some guy's head, you know?
And the funny part about police, because there's never any sanction against them, they will tell you everything. Like, I mean, it is one of those funny things. Like, they're the easiest, like, people to talk to. Like, I mean, all you have to do is just push just a little bit, and they will give you everything because they live in a consequence-free environment, right? You know?
So when one story does happen to blow up and people get pissed off, then they're like, "Whoa, what the fuck? Yeah, we're under attack here."
And honestly, nothing ever happens to any of the police in these stories.
No.
But the thing the police are upset about is that you're mad at them. Like, you know, like, oh my god, I can't believe you guys are mad at us right now. Yeah. Like, you know, and for them, that's like the worst thing that could happen.
Right, because the whole narrative of them, they're supposed. The reason they get up every morning is to be the macho hero of the neighborhood, despite the fact that they're cowards to a man.
Sure, yeah.
You know,
and you touch on that in the piece, right? You talk about like warriors that went out to work for you that didn't come home, and you have to remember them. Like, it's building this myth around policing.
Yeah, and because they'll always talk about like the fall. They refer to them as fallen warriors, all excited. And and they'll say things like, when you're going out there, keep your head on a swivel, and and like everything is like the like cheesiest Vietnam War movie, right? And they do that, and so I mean, that culture gets ingrained in them, and then maybe they'll get on, you know, they'll sign up for like crowd control, or they'll sign up for, you know, SWAT is the ultimate like macho thing you want to do. And then they're given like body armor and like special weaponry and things like that. And it's like, well, yeah, of course they think they're the army. They fucking look like the army. They have the army command structure. Yeah. They have the army mission, right? Like, of course they look like the army.
Yeah. I mean, they're essentially military organizations now. Yeah. They're not. You know, you hear the word paramilitary a lot used to describe, but I mean, if they're agents of the state, paid by the state, legitly out in the open, and they're armed like that, it's just a military organization.
Yeah, I mean, paramilitary typically means like a not professional organization, whereas the police are very much a professional military.
Exactly.
They have a whole bureaucracy.
They may be a bunch of dickheads who don't know what they're doing half the time, but they are a professional military.
Yeah, like AUC, like death squads in Colombia are paramilitary because they don't have a bureaucry. But the police very much have one, and they're very proud of it.
Yeah,
but
you don't have to pass a test to join. You just have to.
Yeah, there's no academy for it, right? Yeah. So they get the body armor and all that. They've been told their whole life that everybody's dangerous on the street. Plus, they have all the internal bullshit that you have from living in America, right? Mm-hmm. So you have these situations, right? Which I've been to, where you'll go to the Klan will do a rally, right? And you'll go to oppose the Klan, and the police will line up, and they do this mysterious thing where they turn their backs to the Klan but face the crowd, right? Yeah. And they're telling you something there about where the danger is in their mind, right? Because for them, the Klan is a neutral institution or whatever, but the crowd of people in front of them are bad.
That is one that... And I mean, we've seen that a lot over the last 2.5 years, because there's been a lot of right wing rallies,
like the Patriot Prayer or whatever,
of all kinds, and that has happened. And it's like you totally get it when it's like the WTO, the cops show up to and there's just some conference of suits, international suits happening. Yeah, they're gonna turn up and face the protesters, okay, but And on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, well, they are all fascists. That's sort of the nature of what they exist to be. But it's still, I have trouble making this leap. Like, how do they, consciously or unconsciously, what is going on there that is what happens?
I mean, they're fed an image of who is dangerous, right? Groups that aren't dangerous include historical organizations that have killed thousands of people. Yeah. Groups that are dangerous. But, I mean, that just goes by, the images they're shown, both in training but also in the media. Mm-hmm. At the same time, they have a lot of crossover membership with these groups.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And that's the obvious one. Yes, a lot of them are actually... fascists.
But the thing is, it's one thing to say that cops in the Klan are frequently have a lot of crossover, which I mean they still do, but
historically
they absolutely are the same organization. But more recently, that still pops up every once in a while. But the other thing is groups that are maybe less on people's radar, like these sovereign citizen groups and things like that. Even groups like Patriot Prayer and all this kind of weird shit, right? That. I mean, looking at it from the left, you're like, yeah, this is a racist organization full of shitheads. Yeah. But they don't necessarily see themselves like that because they aren't openly stating all black people should be they're killed or whatever.
They are suburban white people and they look like it too.
Sure, yeah.
So
and they're generally organizations like gun enthusiasts too. That tends to be their main kind of organizing catch. But the thing is, you can go and read. Stuff like Law Officer Magazine and Police Magazine and things like that. And they will write articles supporting these groups. And they'll be like, yeah, dude, sovereign citizen, cool, man.
This is it's an inversion of the, it's a perfect mirror image of this weird contradiction of being, pro-cop and anti-state, where you can be a cop, design, someone who is... a counter-insurgency warrior for the state and give a big old salute and a thumbs up to an anti-state sovereign citizen gun-toting terrorist.
Sure.
Right-wing terrorist. And it's just I guess if I want to bring that back and tie it to something, it's that our politics much more broadly than these issues have been in sort of our neoliberal moment have been sort of stripped away to these very fuzzy nothings very deliberately, so that all the things that we think about, that our culture broadly thinks about as what politics are and what they're about, are horseshit and aren't the real issues.
Sure.
what we think of as liberal and conservative, what we think as the Democrat and Republican Party, are these really just very bland, actually anti-politics. And so people have no frame of reference to think about any of these things, you know?
Well, and to give you, like, the ultimate sort of Seattle context version of this, right?
Yeah, please.
Is so Seattle gets put on the consent decree in 2011. Mm-hmm. At the time, Mayor Mike McGinn actually, like, kind of pushes for some sort of change in Seattle PD, right? He puts this guy, Jim Pugel, as the interim head of the police department. Mm-hmm. There was a bunch of cases that largely involved, like, people jaywalking and then getting decked. That you know, where there had been sanctions taken against those officers, and the police union, of course, wanted all that to be reversed. Yeah. At the time, we had this 3-person panel that was like 2 cops and then 1 mayor-appointed person to review any punishment that was doled out by the police department, right? Who miraculously always sided with the cops, but you know, McGinn and Jim Pugel pushed back, and they would not let those cases be reviewed, right? Which was good. So the Seattle Police Union plowed $15,000 into Ed Murray's campaign, and Ed Murray got elected and reversed all that shit. He got rid of Pugel. He fired the assistant police chief, who actually was like a pro-reform guy, and he put in the former head of SPOG, or the Seattle Police Officers Guild, the union, as the new interim head of Seattle PD. And miraculously, all those cases got dropped, right? Yeah. Now, at the time when Mike McGinn was pushing these things, and keep in mind, when I tell this story, I feel like I sort of have these like warm memories of Mike McGinn, but this is literally the bare minimum. Like, I mean, this is not doing a lot of work. This is like bare minimum kind of stuff, right? But at the time, the head of SPOG was losing his fucking mind. Oh, yeah. And he was like going on, you know, Facebook and going on, you know, the SPOG newsletter and basically saying, "This is Waco. This is Ruby Ridge." Like, talking about Seattle PD. One, forgetting who killed who in those events. I mean, wait a minute. 2, like, Ruby Ridge was a group of fucking weird racists. Like, but like,
telling
it was so
on yourself a little bit. Like,
it was so telling.
That's some that shit is exclusively the domain of the white power movement. Like, that's all. Like. And also, who killed who there, right? Like fucking cops.
It's like, I think you're forgetting what side of those struggles the police were on.
Again, people, like, how do you get this confused about these forces? Like, it's so bizarre.
You know, and it's partially because they're so enmeshed, because the gun culture has become the, like, sovereign citizen culture, right? And they're so enmeshed in that, so they believe all the weird mythologies of those groups, you know. At one point during that, you know, I remember Waco very vividly being very close by when it happened, and I remember I was at an office party that my dad's office was, like, thrown at a hotel, and everybody was all drunk, and some guy, like, fell through a glass table, and I watched the building burn on TV live. But during the Waco standoff.
I remember watching it.
Yeah, they flew this big banner that said, "We stand with Rodney King," and like we're with the people in LA. And it's like, I don't know that SPOG has. I forget all the other weird shit about Waco, but I don't think they agree with that. You know, but I mean, it's all very strange, but none of it matters, because in their head, it's just something different. It's the state is coming down doing a bad thing.
The thing is, and this is right-wing politics, and it's fascism too. It never makes any fucking sense. It's not meant to. It's always contradictory. It's a jumble of horse shit every time, from the contemporary, you know, Unite the Right types, to the Republican Party, to the Nazis. None of it actually fucking adds up. So the white power movement took on Waco and Ruby Ridge as these, like, cause celebs. Fucking Waco was like a very like those the Branch Davidians were very like
it was a mixed race coalition. They were racist, like they're weird.
They were extremely weird in a lot of ways. They were not racist. They were very pro, like, you know, post-racial like existence, you know, and they were all about that shit.
And if you've ever been to Waco, it makes total sense. Like, Waco is, like, largely black. Like, I mean, look, you know, they couldn't have had racist politics where they're at, but they also didn't, because all they really believed in was the end of the world and, you know, maybe fucking kids. I don't know, but Yeah, all that stuff kind of just gets washed in their brains, though. And the real... Because there is no politics to fascism. There's no overarching, like, idea in fascism other than the idea of, dog eat dog. Like, like this world of, like, pure competition and...
some guys want to have power, and they can convince other people that they should, and it's really cool that they do.
Yeah.
That's fascism. That's
it. And, people always get, like, their heads a little turned backwards because they think fascism, they think Nazis, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, this group isn't fascist because they're not, like, so explicitly racist as the Nazis were. But there was, like, a lot of European fascists that weren't, explicitly racist in that same way, right? Like, Italian fascism did not have this component of, like, racial cleansing.
Yeah.
Now, they believe racist things because every capitalist state believes racist things.
Yeah.
But, like, it wasn't the centerpiece of their sort of, like, worldview they're pitching or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, the centerpiece of the worldview was the working class has to be brought in line with force, and, imperialism is very good, and we should be doing it, right? Like, and that seems to be, like, the major overarching theme. And for fascist cops or whatever, the fact that they, like, they think that they're on the, whatever side of Waco or Ruby Ridge. I mean, it's silly on its face, but in their heads, like, they are this oppressed class, right?
Right.
Who's every bit the equivalent of black people.
It's
or whatever,
victimhood,
right?
and that's the thing is, like, people I think they want to take, like, these confused, like, people with right-wing impulses want to take what is their very petty and misplaced victimhood, which is ludicrous and they want to attach it to something larger, like a wounded nationalism narrative. Mm-hmm. But since that doesn't really exist either, it's got to just, like, reach out and attach to whatever else they can fucking find.
Well, do you think it's the influence of libertarianism, basically? Like the Timothy McVeigh types, the militia. So you have these competing sort of factions where they're collapsing into one broader right wing. And so as a cop, you can kind of pick and... I mean, if you have no ideology, consistent ideology, you can go, I like this part of libertarianism that really despises this overreach on my liberty.
Yeah.
And then I can take this other part of, like, fascism or nationalism or whatever and sympathize with the police.
That uses me as an instrument to overreach on people's liberty.
On either side, you can pick something out that sort of aligns with a right-wing perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's the modern conservative movement. They want to have their... like, white privilege and eat it too.
Yeah, sure. And the reality too is they're not doing, like, a lot of deep thinking about this too. I mean, that's part of the reason why it's cops? Like not very. But the thing is that I think the connecting tissue or whatever why the police, like, believe a lot of this stuff too is it's gun culture. That's the common. That's the modern one, right? Yeah. And then it's the idea of. Like, race suicide, or the idea, like, the country's falling apart, like, and that white people are being outnumbered, and, like, men are being, classed or depositioned or whatever in society, and they see themselves in some way, not even necessarily as protectors of it, but as, like, victims of it, and they're, like, fighting for their lives out there, right?
Right.
To keep it going.
And what it is, they want to portray that as, and they want to attach a warrior narrative to that, but what it is like a deep cowardice.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And that is like a profound cowardice, and that is I mean, that is the coward who is shooting these people.
Oh, sure.
Like, these unarmed people.
So every time
that is what a coward is.
Sure. So every time they, when we have our weekly school shooting or whatever right now, our mass shooting, right? There's always this big narrative.
It's like church.
Yeah, exactly. There's always this big narrative of we need to. This is why we have to have, like, police in schools and more police in schools and things like that. And the reality is Columbine, the thing that kicked it all off, right? Mm-hmm. There were cops at that school, and more so than there being cops in the school. By the time, like, when Dylan and whatever the fuck Harris or whatever these idiots were, when they were in the fucking cafeteria, killing the majority of the people, there was something like 300 or 400 cops outside. And all in full SWAT gear and all that, because they took their time. Like, they worked through that school, right? Yeah. And they were all outside, and to a man, their response to why we didn't go inside was, well, it's dangerous. There's an active shooter in there. Which, I mean, I get. Like, I mean, I don't want to run in there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, kind of your fucking job. Like, you can imagine, like, 100 firemen outside that your building is burning down. Like, well, why aren't you doing anything about this? Like, fuck, it's dangerous, dude. Like, it's like, it's kind of what you signed up for.
Yeah.
And B, if that's the response, then why do we need more of them? Like,
It's when people are unarmed that they're ready to just go in guns blazing. Like,
if they knew for a fact that those two kids did not have any guns or anything like that, they would have done a full-scale, invasion of the school. And probably killed, like, 50 kids. Like, because every kid, they would have been like, it's him! And, like, fucking started firing.
Yeah.
And, but that's kind of always been the case. I think it was in '67 when there was the urban uprising in Detroit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They actually called back the 81st Airborne from going. They were on the way to Vietnam, and they called them back to occupy part of Detroit, right?
Wow.
And there was this story about the two sections of Detroit, right? The part that the military was occupying was like fairly orderly. Soldiers were told not to keep their weapons armed, like to keep them unloaded, and to under no circumstances point them at anybody or anything like that, right?
Well, which is their normal. They're already their training.
Because
they're like, duh, we're not,
because
he's second Airborne's not going to start like pointing guns at civilians.
Yeah, because their thing was like, this is kind of like a Vietnam or whatever. Like, if you're overwhelmed in a city, we don't want to antagonize the locals because like then we'll get killed, right? The Detroit police had a very different approach. They shot out all the streetlights so that they couldn't be seen. Then they went around and they kept claiming they're snipers, but the reality was they were all just shooting wildly because they couldn't see anything. They didn't know where anybody was.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't have any communication, right? So one of them would be walking down the street like a fucking idiot and probably hear a dog in an alley and fire off 10 shots, and then somebody would be like, sniper, and they'd start firing, right? And that was how that went down, right? And like the story was of one group of people who was like trained and rational and maybe had a little bit more of an idea of their incoming doom, and another group of people who were just pissing themselves scared,
Yeah.
And
fucking cowards. Just
sure.
Big pussies.
Yeah, and I mean, that's sort of been the story of American policing, right? I mean,
yeah, that reminds me of Tsarnaev.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They shut down the street for town, right?
The whole town.
Watertown, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the larger area than that, they shut down the whole Boston area, basically.
Well, and they let him bleed to death in a boat for like 3 hours while they circled it outside. Like, damn, what are we gonna do next? I mean, also the Dallas shooter that they blew up with a fucking bomb, a robot carrying a fucking bomb.
Yeah.
The guy, the ex LA cop. Who was capping those cops.
By the way, because he said that
I lived there at the time.
Because he said LAPD was like unretrievably racist and awful. And,
I read his manifesto and it rules.
Officially in support.
He went up to Big. Eventually, he's like, okay, now they're looking for me. He went up to like a cabin in Big Bear, and they just surrounded it and lit it on fire.
Yeah. And to bring it back to the Seattle context, in 2009, which is one of the events that launched the push for the consent decree, there was a guy named Maurice Clemens who went to, I guess it was northern Tacoma, but Lakewood, and shot like 4 cops in a Starbucks at Lakewood, right? Yeah. Real bad review for that Starbucks. Yeah. and he takes off, right? And Seattle PD just gets in their head that because he's black, it must be from the Central District. And they send SWAT just up and down the Central District, just barging in people's houses and shit. But the real capper was the Maurice Clemens' aunt had made the mistake of calling Seattle PD and telling them, like, hey, I got a message on my phone from Maurice saying that he might come by my house. So Seattle PD, of course, is like, scramble all units, right? And they go over to her house and using... sort of what are essentially like grenade launchers, but they essentially fired 74 canisters of tear gas into the house without checking to see if anybody was in it or anything like that. By the way, his aunt and her husband were preschool teachers who did music programs and stuff like that at the
people who had called the police.
Yeah. So cool, But so when they're firing them in the house, keep in mind when I say that they're basically using like grenade launchers, it's not like open a window so I can fire this in.
Right.
They fire through the walls. Like, they can shoot it through the fucking wall. Yeah. And so they just air hold this fucking house with fucking tear gas. And apparently, which I didn't realize this until I knew I was going to come over here and I looked back into the story a little bit. Apparently, the next door neighbor's house, for reasons that nobody can explain, and SPD sure as fuck couldn't explain, just went ahead and fired 5 rounds into the neighbor's house for good measure. Just into the fucking basement.
I can explain that. Like, there's no good clean spots left on this one. I want to get. Oh, it's my turn. It's my I want to.
And as was pointed out by people at the time, like I mean, obviously the danger of not even seeing if anybody was in the house, but B, like this was just such over. I mean, you would have killed anybody that was inside there. You would have just suffocated them. Like, but that was their rational response to this whole event. You know,
I think what they would say, or if they were honest, was they knew it wasn't rational, but that's when a call comes in like that. 4 cops are dead. What you get to do in that situation is what you've been waiting for, which is throw rationality aside. This is an emergency. This is real. We get to now. This is serious. We get to go into gear and throw the rules out, because in the end, at the end of the day, we'll be able to say, well, they killed 4 cops and we were we'll be able to make up a bunch of bullshit.
Well, all the guns that you got to play with, you now get to use for real, right? Yeah. And at the same time, that it's like, this is free time. Nobody's ever going to say anything bad about it. And honestly, that whole thing ended up being this giant fiasco. I don't know if you remember, Maurice Clemens ended up getting killed by a cop on the street who just saw him, Maurice Clemens was already basically dead by that point. He had been shot and been bleeding out for, 12, 15 hours. And I guess he sort of fell out of a truck and the cop just walked up and shot him. But they also arrested a bunch of his family members and gave them 400-year sentences and shit like that.
For aiding and abetting, right?
Yeah, for supposedly aiding and abetting. Yeah. All but one of which have been overturned, and that one is in appeals and will probably be overturned as well. And and they're all overturned for DA misconduct and things like that. Which I believe the guy's Mark Lindquist, who's still, by the way, the. Goddamn, what county is Tacoma? And Pierce.
Pierce.
Yeah, he's still the Pierce County DA. But anyway, so they all got overturned because none of these people had helped them, right? But it was just such bloodlust. And apparently, in a completely separate complaint against Lindquist that was filed by some of his staffers about what an abusive dickhead he was, they quoted him as saying, the Maurice Clemens situation was awesome. It was $100,000 worth of free publicity, But so for all the people involved, it was great. We get to go around kicking fucking doors. We get to fucking shoot off. I mean, I'm sure some of them were just shooting tear gases up in the air. For them it was fantastic.
It's very understandable. It's like an adolescent impulse, right? That is I think if at least I think most men, if you're honest, you can think back to when you were 13, and that you grew out of. You were this is a fantasy of an emergency where you have something, something exciting actually happens, in the suburbs, that's a fan, and that's, for a cop, it's got to be what they're waiting for, right?
Yeah, and your life feels small and empty, right? Now you have the big event,
Yeah.
But yeah, and that colors a lot of the reaction to everything, and the other part of it is I think it's one of the things you have to deal with. I have a friend who's very anti-gun or whatever, and I always tell him, the one thing you're really going to have to deal with is not all the racism and stuff like that. Shooting guns is fucking cool, dude.
Yeah.
It's super cool.
You talk to anybody that shot a gun, they're like, it rules.
It does, dude. It's unearned power in your hand. You have and you didn't pay anything for it. It's just right there. You could be the biggest dumbass on the planet, and you have the same killing power in your hand that the whoever next to you does. Yeah, and for police, they have that same instinct. Shooting guns fucking rules, dude. And, they're given just free carte blanche on it, right? Yeah. So they just do whatever. And put that in the basket with them being afraid of everything. Mm-hmm. Super fucking racist, right? I had one cop who... this guy was becoming a cop that I knew, and he was in Beaverton, Oregon, that hotbed of crazy shit. And he was he was trying to tell me that he's dude, we have a real Latino gang problem. They're a real issue here. Yeah, and it was before MS-13. He almost certainly would have said that now, but I was well, that just can't be true. As many times I've been in Beaverton, I don't even know they've seen a Latino person. And what it turned out was there was this one bar on the outskirts of Beaverton that because they played conjunta or whatever, and people spoke Spanish, it was the one place people who work construction and stuff felt comfortable going to, right? Yeah. So that was the Latino bar. So what he used to do, and he just telling me this, just unbidden. He's just every night, we go over there and we just hang out in our car and we pull over every car that comes out of there and check them for, weapons, warrants, whatever. He's like, we make so many arrests. And I was like, could you imagine if you did that to any bar in America? Yeah. Like, you'd be arresting everybody. Yeah. Like, it's like, of course, if you check every single person, some of them are going to be drunk.
Right.
We live in a country where everybody has guns. So, some of them's going to have guns.
Yeah.
And we also live in a country that has 2.5 million people in prison. You don't do that without a lot of people having warrants. So, people are going to have fucking warrants. Yeah. But it's like, that doesn't mean you have a crime problem. It means you're a fucking dickhead who's, shaking people down outside of a bar.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Fuck. Okay, so let's take this, bring it to the present moment, right where we're sitting in Seattle, and talk about the new police contract.
Sure. So the new police contract that it was passed, but we're waiting for the federal judge who oversees the consent decree to decide whether or not it conforms with the consent decree, right?
Yeah.
Which for a while I would have said it was a slam dunk. He's going to say it's going to conform because a year ago, even though CLPD had done absolutely nothing to conform with the consent decree, he was like, things are going great. The police are doing everything right. Now, maybe that's not going to be the case because, in the case of this cop who broke this woman's eye socket while she was handcuffed in the back of his car, and Seattle PD had her case overthrown, or the case of the officer overthrown in arbitration, and got him about 150 grand maybe in back pay.
Yeah.
The judge actually pushed back and said, no, you at least need to get an explanation of why you would do this. So maybe the judge will not sign off on it. We'll see. But the main thing it does is the SPOG contract. So we passed a law a year ago, making it easier to punish police for doing things that are wrong, right? We didn't give them as many avenues to appeal, right? Yeah, with a process, right? We didn't give them as many avenues to appeal. We put more civilians on the various review boards, all this kind of stuff. We also said we changed evidentiary standards, right? So for police being charged with excessive, or not charged, but being punished at work for excessive use of force, or for lying, which Seattle actually uniquely does not allow its police officers to lie to people, which is very unique in the country. That no other department does that. Lying is actually considered to be a very important part of policing. They even have their own term for it. It's called test-a-lying. But anyways, it's always great when they have a cute term. But anyways, so it was a nice sweeping reform, whatever, it probably wouldn't change policing generally, but it's something.
Yeah.
So anyways, the SPOG contract essentially gets rid of all that, right? It says it begins by saying anything that conflicts between the SPOG contract and this ordinance, the contract holds sway, right? So we can repeal the ordinance without actually repealing it. A huge political victory for Durkin, I'm sure.
Yeah.
At the same time, it changed, it gave police officers a lot more forums to appeal to, so they could, pick and choose the one they think is, most likely to, let them off.
Right.
And it changed that evidentiary basis, which I don't think I even explained, but the evidentiary basis was that there had to be clear proof that, the police officer did something wrong on purpose, right? Which is generally called with malicious intent,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
So if I go out and kill you, you would have to prove that in my mind I wanted to kill you for untoward reasons.
Rather than, which the thing we always hear, which is, well, they were following their training and the standard procedure.
Well, and what they would say is what they say in every police shooting or every incident, which was, I was scared. Yeah. Now, if you say, I was scared, what can they do, right? I can't look in your brain and determine that, right? So it was basically get out of jail free card. This came up in the John T. Williams shooting.
Yeah.
And this is when most people found out about this, when the local DA had to go and write a letter to the Seattle Times to be like, this is why we're not going to try Ian Burke, because even though he shot this person during rush hour in the middle of downtown and we all saw it, who knows? Maybe he was scared.
When he so scared that he reached for, pulled out, cocked, and fired his service weapon when he thought he was pulling out his taser.
And even that is like the wrong metric to even go by, because in the real world, right, if, you know, we're hanging out on this boat together and I'm like, all of a sudden get terrified of the sea, I can't just shoot you, right?
Yeah.
You know, like generally that's considered still a crime. Like just because you were like, just because you did your crime in cowardice doesn't make it not a crime. But for the police, that's their get out of jail free card, and that is the thing, which is why they always play up, like in the killing of Michael Brown, they're like, he was enormous, he was 8 feet tall and 300 pounds and attacking, you know, because that's their get out of jail free card. So anyways, so they changed it from that to, it just had to be a preponderance of evidence that you did something wrong, right? So just if a reasonable person looked at this evidence, do they think you did something, which is huge, yes.
Well, that's going to be closer to the civilian standard, right?
Okay. So the SPOG contract got rid of that. So cool.
Awesome.
So in anything, so, and again, the SPOG contract is also very wishy-washy, so a lot of this will have to get decided legally, right? Yeah. And I'm not a fucking lawyer or anything, so I'm just going off of what lawyers have said. Sure. So, and mainly off what the Seattle Civilian Police Commission has said, which you can go to their website and read their review of the contract. It's very long, but it's very interesting. But so in cases where the police officer being punished would affect their future employment, they can appeal to a review process that has a higher standard of evidence. That's the wording in the contract.
Higher standard.
The higher standard would mean going back to the, like, you know...
get out of jail free. Yeah.
So, at the same time, and this is, like, really big in the Cynthia Whitlatch case, which will... I mean, I can't imagine there's anything more boring than let's me go point by point through the SPOG contract, so I'll just kind of give one example to illustrate what has been lost here. In the case of the Cynthia Whitlatch, if a civilian...
To review, she was the officer who was rolling down, like... Capitol Hill and saw... What's his name?
William Wingate.
William Wingate. Just walking with a cane.
Well, it was a golf club cane, right?
Right,
it was a golf club that he was using as a cane.
cane,
And when she saw it, though, it was, Beretta or whatever. She had to do whatever dumb
He
thing.
was raising it menacingly in her direction or some shit.
So she essentially saw an elderly black man and was like, he belongs in jail. So there is a rule in the SPOG contract that says that within 180 days of an infraction being known by one of your commanding officers, you have to be informed that they are pursuing discipline against you, right? Okay. Or that they have made a disciplinary judgment against you, right? So we'll walk through a little bit of this case, right? So William Wingate, and here, I'll be seeing if I can find... Well, I won't even find the dates, we're not going to worry too much about that. But so William Wingate gets caught, he gets arrested by her, he gets taken to jail, he obviously realizes this is bullshit.
Yeah.
He complains to, I think, some of his family members who he'll come up with some community resources, and they very quickly inform Seattle PD that, he has been mistreated. Yeah. Seattle PD just is like, cool, and throws it in the trash, right? But the key is, what do the commanding officers knows now? So the clock has started, right? They're not telling anybody, and there is an official process by that point, because it's 2014. Under the consent decree, we had this thing called the Office of Police Accountability, and there's an official process that they could go through and do that. But did you know about that? No. I didn't know about that. Did you know about that? No, right? So, and of course, when they go to complain to the police, they're not telling them. Right. I mean, fuck that, dude, right?
Right.
So, for months, they're complaining to the air, right? And they eventually start complaining to, like, The Stranger and Seattle Times and stuff like that. And it's something like 4 or 5 months later, they finally realize through an actual news story in the Seattle Times that this office exists and that you can file a complaint with them, right? So they go over to the office and tell them. Now, I think they had something like not a whole lot of time left, maybe like a month left to get this whole thing resolved in order to meet the 180-day, limit, right? So the OPA gets this, and then they just start dragging their feet. So, like, cool, we got 180, like, they just told us this, we got 180 days to resolve this. No big deal. So they start dragging their feet. About a month into it, they find out, oh shit, like, the Seattle Police Command knew about this, like, definitely some point in the past. Oh well. So they start chug along on it, and they finally give down their opinion, which is that they think that Cynthia Whitlatch should be fired, right? The review board agrees, and Mayor Murray at that time fires Cynthia Whitlatch.
Yeah. She
immediately appeals, right? And her grounds for appeal was not, hey, I'm not racist, because we all know she is by this point. We've read her Facebook page and stuff like that. So it's not, I'm not racist. It's not, I did nothing wrong. She's very clear, like, I definitely did something wrong. Her appeal is that hey, technicality, guys. The 180 days actually started like way back in the summer, and you waited like a year to tell me, and that's past the 180 days, right? So anyways, this appeal kind of is getting kicked around because it's a little hot right after the fact, and nobody's going to touch it, right? So they kind of let it get kicked around. And last year, they end up resolving, they come to an agreement with Cynthia Whitlatch, which is that they will change her status from fired to retired, and they will give her back pay, right? Oof. So we end up giving Cynthia Whitlatch a sum that's roughly, I think they gave William Wingate like $400,000, and they gave Cynthia Whitlatch like $200,000, and then they paid all of Cynthia Whitlatch's legal fees, which were plenty against, which is another $600,000 in legal fees, because she had to pay not just her legal fees, but she had to pay the legal fees of William Wingate as part of his ruling, which the city actually indemnifies the police for any. So if you have a ruling against a cop, the city has to pay it, right? The cop is never coming out of the cop's money. So by the time this is all said and done, it ends up being about $1.5 million. The city just drops on this like idiot case for this woman who, like, best case scenario, isn't going to work for Seattle PD anymore. In her agreement, she said she won't be a cop anymore. I don't know how that's enforceable.
Right.
And that, but we gave her this huge payday, and all the shit was kind of written off or whatever. And that was our beautiful police review process.
Yeah.
Now, that legislation we passed last year would have actually resolved this problem, right? The 180-day clock begins when the OPA starts the investigation. If the OPA takes a break and stops looking at your case, the clock stops, right? So, if they have to do some, something else, clock stops and it waits. It's also now just a metric of, like, we want to resolve things in 180 days, but we don't have to, right? So they can continue working on it. Oh, that's gone. So we're going to be right back to... And the reason why this is a big deal is what happened in the case of Cynthia Whitlatch is very typical.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is, you as a citizen have something bad happen to you. You, not being somebody who studies police or anything, goes to the police department and complains. They say, oh, wonderful, cool. Maybe they take some notes. They throw it immediately in the trash. Yeah. Not one of them ever reports it, right? Like, I mean, that's...
Yeah.
Every review of every police department says they never report any complaints, right? There's generally, at this point in most major cities, some sort of civilian review board that you can take your complaint to. It will not be publicized to you. Nobody will tell you about it or anything like that. And meanwhile, your clock for, like, trying to get any sort of, response to this from the city is moving. And that's why police never get punished for anything. I mean, in the long run, that's why they never get punished for anything. And the SPOG contract takes us back to that model. Which, by the way, police are very aware that this is a get-out-of-jail-free card, right? Like, they're very aware that, like, this is their ace in the pocket. SPOG, when SPOG appeals a ruling, usually it's some sort of suspension or something like that. When they appeal that ruling to get the back pay, this is the card they go to the most. This is the majority of their sort of argument will be, well, you didn't follow the technical procedure and you missed the deadline, which you will miss almost all the time because nobody's going to help you make it.
180 days.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. And everybody's going to keep it secret from you, and good luck.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, there was community leaders who were helping out William Wingate, who presumably are very knowledgeable about a lot of city process, who had no idea that this existed.
Yeah.
So, and this contract passed the council by
8
to 1.
Mm-hmm.
Go
cool.
Take a wild guess who actually voted against it. And so, which is awesome, great. Everyone's on board with that. Durkin's cool with it, obviously.
Best and Durkin were crowing the pay increase.
And Durkin should be noted, just as a quick flashback too, when Mike McGann was ousted, Ed Murray came in and he immediately stopped the reform process with Seattle PD. Durkin was the U.S. District Attorney overseeing this process. Yeah. And there was various times where City Council got very upset with Ed Murray about what was happening, and Durkin always intervened to cover for him, and basically would write letters to the council about, no, he's doing great, actually Mike McGinn's an asshole, and would speak to the media and would cover for him. So Durkin's been the point man in stopping Seattle police reform from the beginning, which is cool.
Despite being like the federal overseer of the consent decree. Well, okay, so then it has to be reviewed by this judge, but he called bullshit today on this one firing, right?
Yeah, so there was this happened in 2014, actually the month before the William Wingate incident. But a cop was responding to a domestic disturbance, and there was a woman who was, I believe, in a fight with her boyfriend or whatever, and I assume alcohol was involved or whatever, right? And the police officer apparently told them, I gotta arrest one of you, any, meeny, miny, mo, and took her, right? So already cool.
Yeah.
Cool. and of course she was upset, and he handcuffed her, hands behind her back, threw her in the back of his car, and as he threw her in, she apparently kicked at him. Now there's a lot of debate about whether she actually hit him or whatever. I actually don't think it matters one way or the other.
Yeah.
And his response to that was he leaned over and punched her so fucking hard in the face, he broke her eye socket. Then shut the door and just went about his day and presumably went home and thought he was a great guy, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, the city, so she ended up filing against the city. She ended up getting about $195,000. Again, this is the theme, is that we're paying a lot of money for this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But, SPOG appealed on his behalf, this time essentially like on a self-defense kind of like platform.
Yeah.
And the review board was like, yeah, cool. And again, they waited long enough. I mean, this is 2014, so they waited quite a while. I mean, this ruling came out a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
They waited quite a while to like finally just go ahead and give him his back pay and reinstate him. They changed it from him being fired to I believe 15-day suspension, which they were like is a pretty hefty. Come on, guys, that's a pretty big punishment.
Yeah.
But, I mean, to review, he had a woman handcuffed in the back of his squad car, and his response wasn't to shut the door or anything like that. It was to break her eye socket.
Yeah.
And the response from the review board was, well, maybe his behavior was inadvisable, but it wasn't, like, not understandable or something, like that, right? So they had this great quote where it's like...
In what context,
again, like, cool.
I would ask,
Yeah, in the context of where we believe that police are, like, in great danger and need to be violent,
and need to let off some steam sometime.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so that was the thing that the judge, I think, like most people who looked at it, was like, holy shit, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, no, come on, guys. You gotta have some standards.
All right, I'm going to offer just a cynical political analysis of this here. And say that this is no, like, shit happens like this. There must be other cases that are also whack.
Sure.
No coincidence that the contract was just controversially passed and that it's landed on this same judge's desk now, and he's got some time to ponder over this and decide whether or not to okay it, and to give himself personally and that part of the process a little political cover. He flipped through some pages of some whack-ass decisions that he's supposed to okay and go, oh, this one really sucks. Yeah. I will come out, make a stink, look cool on this, we'll fire that cop, and then I'll sign that contract.
Well, in the review board, which was a 5-person review board that was looking at this officer's case, they seemed to be, like, very on the fence about, like, what to do. But then when the SPOG contract passed, I think they saw the writing on the wall that's like, full bore, the police are cool again. And that's where they okayed it. Yeah. In the case of, like, maybe a conspiracy theory of the judge's part, who knows if he's even that smart. The reality is I think it's just much to do about nothing. The police contract, I went from like 100% sure the judge was going to sign off on it to like 80% sure. But even if he doesn't, I mean, SPOG, just by refusing to sign a contract with the city, had forced the city to use their old contract for 4 years. And the reality too is the crazy thing about creating a armed force of psychopaths in your city is if you tell them no, you're not really 100% sure what they're going to do. Yeah. And, so Mayor David Dinkins in New York figured this out in the 90s when, he supported what was called the Mullen Commission, which is an investigation into how shitty the NYPD is. And if you ever want to learn about police, read that shit. But he supported the Mullen Commission, and I think he said that, like, LAPD might have been wrong in the Rodney King situation. Some like, dumb, like, current event thing, right? Yeah. And NYPD literally rioted at City Hall. Like, they all showed up, apparently by all accounts of reporters there, from the New York Times to, like, the Village Voice, fucking hammered. Were, like, waving guns in the air, and were shouting, Mayor Dinkins was a black mayor, and we're shouting very interesting racial slurs at the mayor and what they were going to do to him, right?
Yeah.
And
exercising their democratic right to gather peaceably and protest.
Yeah. And, Mayor Dinkins' response to this, like, quite frankly terrifying spectacle was to just stop reforming the NYPD. Wow. So, I mean, there have been times in American history when police have, like, just, like, killed political officials they didn't like, primarily in the South in the period of Jim Crow. Mm-hmm. But, it hasn't happened, like, super recently, but that's mainly because they've always gotten everything they've wanted.
Right. Yeah, they kind of already won that battle.
Yeah, and the thing is, if you came in, say we elected, our greatest, dream of a mayor and a city council, so it's, we got Ed Murray back in the mayor's office, right? We got Jeff on the city council, Jeff Bezos on the city council. Dream team. The entire, what are they called, the innovation battalion or whatever.
I like that better,
Yeah, we got the innovation battalion filling out the rest of the city council. We don't know any of their names, it's fine, like, who cares? Yeah. Dream team, best possible scenario, and they come down hard on Seattle PD, and they're like, you guys are fucked. The things you're doing are shitty. The things you say suck. Like, we're getting rid of half of you, and, all this kind of stuff. Literally, what's to stop them from, like, just fucking shooting the mayor, right?
Yeah.
They did it in San Francisco. It's not like it's never happened, right? Yeah. So, I mean, it's an open question that I think we never ask ourselves, because the answer is terrifying, right? Like, what if you tell the police to stop and they don't?
That's chilling.
We have
truly chilling.
That's really fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
So we've recorded this podcast. Let's now think about whether we want to actually release it into the universe. Because it is terrifying. Because you have this, you have a fascist, like, military force.
Who has every economic incentive not to listen to you.
And it seems to actually only be, unlike in a, like, openly fascist system, it seems to be only loyal really to itself. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, it's not following any kind of leader. They're not, like, saluting any Führer.
And we've, like, put this dangerous anti-state ideology. Yeah. And I will tell you, like, one of the things that first got me thinking about this is when Egyptians went to Tahrir Square, and it was very clear that Mubarak was done. Right? Yeah. Mubarak sends an order down to the military and tells them, like, shoot the people in the square. And the military doesn't, right? Yeah. This is the moment that Mubarak is done. Yeah. You know who did go kill the people in the square? The fucking cops! Yeah. The cops kept going! Like, they just were like, even when it was obvious to everybody that Mubarak was done, the police like, nah, dude, we're still gonna, like, shoot some motherfuckers, we're gonna take people back and torture them, like, all this shit. They kept going.
Well, that says it right there. Yeah. That it was, zoom out of that and go, well, then it wasn't their, like, loyalty to Mubarak. Mm-hmm. That it was their loyalty only to themselves, the police, and their attitude about the world and what fun they wanted to have. Like, that was like a Disneyland for them.
Well, and their concept of, like, urban order and things like that, right? You know, this was disorder. People were not at work. They were in the street, and that's bad, right?
So you have to kill them and torture them.
Sure, until they get back into doing things. And, and, I mean, that mindset's absolutely rife. Again, like, one of the things that was underreported was in the Abu Ghraib prison scandal that the people in the pictures, the one woman, the two guys that were showing in all the great pictures, I can't remember what their names are anymore, but either all of them or two of them were prison guards in the United States, right? So, like, for them, of course they didn't think they're doing anything right. They'd probably have done many of the same things in the United States, right? You know? So, like, they're just, people, I remember when Occupy Wall Street happened here, and people in Westlake would be like, cops are workers too. It is like, fuck, they're not. Dude. Like, you are not going to convince these people of anything, and,
All cops are bad.
Yeah.
No such thing as a good cop.
Yeah. Well, we did earlier endorse that Oakland, or not the Oakland, the LA cop. We did endorse his manifesto, which, having read it, we might want to take some parts back. Maybe a mild...
An odd phrase here and there, yeah. I'll come out in favor of abolishing policing in America. I'm very comfortable with that. This has been a wild ride. Brian Platt, thank you for coming on Seattle Sucks. Thanks for coming down to the boat, the high seas, pirate radio out here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I hope the music and the girls dancing on top of the boat did not affect the podcast in any way.
We've got Colin's got some tools for that in
we can edit all
the
mermaids out.
It's so loud in the cabin, so it's amazing. It's a real technical feat that you can edit it out.
Thank you for coming.
Is there
anything else you want to plug? You have any other pieces coming up soon that we should watch out for, or?
I'm probably gonna write something about. I've been kind of waiting to hear what the judge was gonna say.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, who knows what time it's gonna happen, but probably write something about the Seattle PD stuff, and also just a quick comment for anybody that wants to go look at this. I'm probably gonna write some of this soon too. Is police reform is so fucking impossible, and convincing them not to kill people is so impossible, that schools all over the country have started this new program where it's part of your driver's ed or your civics class, that you do this unit on how to behave around the police so they don't murder you. And it's this whole thing about where your hands should be when you get pulled over. When you read their PowerPoints and stuff, it literally reads trying to explain to somebody how not to get attacked by a bear in the woods. Keep in mind, this is an irrational, ferocious creature. Do nothing to upset it, right? And it's legitimately terrifying, but it's also, it's deeply. I was gonna say embarrassing. It is that it's depressing because it says there's nothing we can do. These guys are going to. We just can't stop them from killing people, so we're going to have to.
Well, our current politics are the neoliberal order we live under is incapable of even imagining change.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's a very real representation of that.
It's about mitigation for them.
Yeah. That's all they can come up with. Yeah. And so that's why, and I love saying this to my old Lib Dem friends, abolish the police. Because you have to start from the absolute most extreme position, because the reformist attitude just isn't going to get you anywhere. Yeah, you're going to have to answer some questions about who's going to do some of the actually necessary work that for some reason we have these thugs doing.
Sure.
When
a teen walks across your front lawn, what are you going to do? Who are you going to call?
But but who is going to respond for wellness checks, and who's going to go help some homeless people on the street?
Sure.
Probably shouldn't be cops, because they're probably just going to end up killing someone. Yeah. We do need to do those things. We need to change the whole nature of our society. So it's you have to think systematically and structurally to answer the question, how do you abolish policing? But it needs to fucking go.
Yeah. And you gotta, look, police haven't always existed. There's no reason to believe they will always exist. But liberals will defend them to death, and that's the thing you should probably remember.
Because they happen to be present here at the end of history.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, exactly. From having pushed the abolish ICE line for a long time, I'm very happy to have gone from being ignored to now being shouted at by people about how it's a hollowed institution that can never be changed. From 10 years ago, we absolutely cannot change in any way. So
it's here. Whatever is now is the end of history. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Hit up Brian. Check him out. We'll post the link to his article, and you can find more articles by him at Jacobin from there. He's at abolish_ice on Twitter.
I'm at the worst handle in the world. At
right.
Brian_no name.
That's right.
Or you're gonna search abolish ICE, or better yet, don't look at anything on Twitter ever. Not just my account, all accounts on Twitter. Best possible.
It's no good. We're at Seattle Sucks Podcast.
Seattle Sucks Pod.
Seattle Sucks Pod. I can't get any of them right. Whatever.
Nobody should be on Twitter.
And
I kind of agree with you.
Yeah.
You can find this podcast on any place where podcasts live.
But you're already listening to it, so give us money on Patreon. We know you're not going to, but hey, this is episode 21. This podcast is old enough to drink. And, thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Back to Alaska. We love our cops, our law